Happy Saturday, gang. Welcome to another John's Comics with Kids discussion. This tonight is a little bit different. We usually do Saturday night movie discussions on my channel, and we're definitely doing that tonight, but we're melding something together. I have three awesome community members here tonight. All their channels are linked down below in the description because I really wanted these three to help me work through the Best Picture winner for this last year, Oppenheimer. And there's a lot to get into. This is not only an epic film, but an important film and an interesting film in a lot of ways. So there's a lot of nuance here, a lot of things to discuss. And ultimately, it was one of these members that got me thinking that maybe there's an interesting discussion here, not only just about cinema and science, but science and ethics and invention. And so let's bring in the crew that we've got for tonight. We've got Lady Fantastic. What's going on, Caroline?
Oh man, I'm ready to talk about intangible things.
I'm excited about that.
Yeah, it's fun
for sure.
Yeah.
And we got the G-Man, Robert Galvin here. What's going on, Robert?
Hey, G-Man.
Good to see you, sir.
Good, you too, both of you.
And we've got returning, just recently coming back, we got Gore Vidal himself. What's going on, Gore?
Yeah, good evening, everyone.
Hey.
So it was Caroline who said something in one of the live streams I was doing when this came up, where she said, I just want to get into this about science and about what this movie is telling me. So I want to first go around the horn real quick and just start with you, Caroline. What did you think of this movie? Like, when you saw this film and you came out, what were your original thoughts?
First of all, I thought, wow, Christopher Nolan tells stories wonderfully. He's very, for me at least, very imaginative and creative with the way he tells a story. And I think, he tried to not be very preachy about it. I think you saw through the repercussions of everybody, like the fallout, literally, like not just like nuclear, but the actual political and social fallout, and the implications it had for when you drop that, something that, and so this movie is just like an argument of, well, just because you can do something, should you do it? And it's tough because he was faced with the fact that, like, oh, well, if I don't do it, then the Nazis are going to do it, right? So anyway,
there was definitely that external pressure for him, right? And the U.S. as well, right? Yeah,
right. So I'm going to leave it at there and let everybody else get in words.
Sure. Yeah. Robert, what about you? When you first saw this film, what were some of the thoughts that came to you?
I thought it was a very fascinating film. I enjoyed the part where it kind of shows you the scientist himself when you're watching it. Are all the implications correct? No, probably not. There's a lot of social turmoil going on during that time, during the 50s, lots of it. Communism, fascism, a whole bunch of stuff going on. But yeah, I want to hear more, but
we will. Yeah.
I'll reserve.
And now, Gore, I know you're a big history buff. I know you're a big cinema buff. What were your takeaways from Nolan's film?
I was impressed how much history he packed in 3 hours. And like Caroline said, he wasn't being preachy or didactic, which is tempting to do in a movie like this. And I think the script, I noticed, if I'm correct, he wrote the script without his brother. Is that right?
I think so, yeah.
And usually he collaborates with his brother, but I think it's something very personal to know. At least it seemed to me was something very personal to him. And I don't know how he did this, but he managed to make it somewhat accessible to the general public. What I mean by that is somewhat, because, I mean, if you didn't know anything about the Cold War and what led up to the Cold War, and the Russian Revolution, the Spanish-American War, the Spanish War and such, and what was going on in the 20s and 30s, you probably were a little bit lost. And but it was an impressive achievement, nevertheless, how much he was able to put in there. And although I think people probably left, scratching their heads, meaning, what was all this? Why were they doing this to him? What was the big deal about being a communist? Why did people lose jobs for this? it for some people it just doesn't make any sense how things were, and we can discuss maybe why that is, but I thought the film, it was impressive, and it's one of the loudest movies I've ever been.
Yes, the music track was beautiful.
It was intense, but I liked the movie. I liked it very much.
Yeah, the sound design really, really strong. So, Caroline, you said you wanted to talk a little bit about it's that line from Jurassic Park, right? Your scientists were so busy thinking about if they didn't stop to think if they should, right? What are, as someone who works in the field of science, what are some of your thoughts on this?
So there are two types of science, and there's basic science where you do research to discover more about the natural world, like. That's what I think of as rock star science. And then there are the applied sciences where, it's very translational in nature, and it generally tends to be more directly translational to the medical field, in that it directly relates to humans and disease and medicine and things like that. Okay. So that's like more of your applied sciences. And so when at a time where quantum physics was just a burgeoning field, you have these massive world conflicts, and everyone's implicated. All of society is implicated. That's the scientists too.
Yeah.
And they start playing with things that's getting close to God level. And it's like they don't realize what the actual fallout of that's going to be. They don't realize the consequences. He even said it's build it now and justify it later, but get the technical beauty, execute it, just get it done.
Yeah.
And that came at a great human cost.
Yes, it did.
Yeah. So following on the heels of that, Robert, do you feel like scientists have any moral obligation?
Yes, they do.
You think so?
They do. But here's the thing, though. Scientists have also been guinea pigs and been used for their talents, used for their brains, constantly, for better benefit of mankind, as they say.
Yeah, for sure. Do you feel like the film, Robert, demonizes Oppenheimer in any way? Or
yes, it does. In a way. In a way, yeah, it does. Yeah. In a sort of a sense, it does. In a way.
I mean, I feel that there's definitely. I mean, you could argue that.
Yeah.
The bigger demon is clearly a politician.
A politician.
They spend 2/3 of the movie saying, like, look how bad Oppenheimer is, and then the last third saying, but he's not as bad as any politician. It's kind of like the little twist at the end, I feel. Gore, what are your thoughts on the responsibility a scientist has in discovery?
Well, I think you sent me some quotes, right, about the ethics in science. I think we all got them, and I don't know who it was, but I do think there's a separation between science and ethics. I mean, we have a natural curiosity to do things, to study things. And with Oppenheimer, he had a natural curiosity about physics, and got him to basically study, what happens when, for example, a sun collapses, and basically it was a black hole, right?
Yeah.
His intention for wanting to understand that wasn't to better mankind. It was just he was curious. He wanted to understand this. And I think that's very normal. It's about us being curious. That's what makes us very human. What's over there? I don't know. Let's find out. And then you go over there. Some of you make it back. Some of you don't. And then when you get over there, you discover something, and you keep going and going and going. And then at that point, the moral compass is something separate. And so I can separate the two. And I think when he began to do this now, and I think when he was offered the position to run Los Alamos and to help develop the bomb, and it was still within something he was deeply interested in. And then, of course, the idea was to stop the Germans from getting it first. But certainly it was something that came to him, But I think there was a moral. There was something moral in the sense from his end, is that this has to be built. It has to be built by us, because already what we knew about the Germans was if they do get it first,
They will.
I think in the sense of he was making a judgment about the Americans. If the Americans use this, they're not going to use it the way Hitler's going to use it for world domination. I mean, that was, I think, an early assumption,
Right.
and so they had to be done from his end. So it was for a moral purpose, even though the implications may be immoral or amoral for that.
Amoral at best. Yeah.
Amoral,
Right.
yeah.
Amoral at best. Yeah. What do you think, John?
I mean, I picked some quotes out to Gore's point.
I like the quotes.
Yeah, I just was kind of curious about different scientists and their thoughts, and the one that I liked the most was a plant physiologist named Arthur Galston, and he said, "Nothing that you do in science is guaranteed to result in benefits for mankind. Any discovery, I believe, is morally neutral and can be turned either to constructive or destructive ends. That's not the fault of science." And I that's kind of where I fall on some of this. Is discovery isn't by its nature good or bad, but how we use it, right? It then becomes the big moral question, and that's not the purview of science. I think in some ways it's the purview of mankind, and that's maybe where regulation and governments and organizations come into play. But does the inventor need to spend their time? And I think this is what Caroline is saying. Should they spend time considering outcomes of creation?
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of where you're at with it, Caroline?
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially the whole idea of testing hypotheses, right? And creating them. You try and determine what will or won't happen, but there are some things where it's just like, just because you can, should you? And yes, discovery in and of itself is not good or bad. It just is. Okay. But because the people, the agents doing the discovering are humans, and humans are inherently flawed, what we do will always be morally ambiguous, even when we try to hold ourselves to moral standards, because it's always relative with time, isn't it?
Right.
Because as we learn more, we become like, and that's the whole thing. He thought, okay, well, we're just going to build it as a deterrent, right?
Right.
And that will be it. They'll be so scared because, it's super, they'll never know. I mean, it's like in nothing they've ever seen before. And then it's like they found out the Russians already had one. And then it's just like, okay, so I don't know, Oppenheimer, like you have the science, but then the thing is it's never the science, is it? It's always the politics and the intersection of who controls the science is what determines if a good or bad thing happens to it.
Absolutely.
And so that intersection, and using scientists for your own will to try and force them to do things, oil companies, or whatever. It's like, that's where it gets muddy. Okay.
Well, and
it's never the science, it's the humans.
It's because whether it's a scientist making something on behalf of a corporation for their usage, or whether it's on behalf of a government for their usage, it instantly leaves the realm of theory.
He just froze. No.
Am I freezing? Oh, crud.
Come back, John. There you go.
Leaves the realm of theory.
Yep.
Yeah, and it enters the realm of money ultimately, right?
Huge.
It enters the realm of
power,
who can use that
influence.
power, that influence, that money to achieve an end.
I think with Oppenheimer, though, we do sense in the movie what I think he did capture well, Nolan did, was because we get, if you notice, Niels Bohr appears in there, and he's played by Kenneth Branagh.
Mm-hmm.
and he was the Danish physicist.
Yep.
And when Niels Bohr understood, when he was able to leave Denmark and he went to England and he came to the U.S. and Bohr had been thinking about this. You can develop the bomb, and I understand the necessity of the bomb, but you got to think what's going to happen afterwards, because now it exists.
Yep.
And also, if we jumped maybe maybe a few years later, when the bomb is dropped, 3 months later, he goes to meet Truman in the White House.
Yep.
He's there with Truman and Secretary of State Burns. And he makes that comment about I have blood in my hands, and Truman says, "You don't have any blood on your hands.
Yeah.
I dropped the bomb, not you. I mean, I decided to do it, not you." And but Truman is the idea of this has to be kept secret, but it was Oppenheimer and Bohr and all the physicists says you can't keep something like this secret.
No.
I mean, the science is already there.
It's science. Yeah.
And it was a relatively pretty new technology as well.
But it was already there because the way it was.
You can't hide what already exists.
Bingo. Yeah. Like when that journal in Germany was published in 1939, it was then it went to France, then went to England, then was published in the U.S. I think in Nature magazine, and so that's the way it works. The way scientists, at least in that area, worked was you shared information. That's the way it worked.
Yes.
And when Truman said something, he was looking at least the way it was done there at Oppenheimer, like, you're an idiot, and but Oppenheimer was not the idiot.
No,
the idiot was actually Truman.
Yeah.
And you can't keep this a secret. And I guess the point of the way Niels Bohr is going to get to Oppenheimer is use your authority, because the only way to do this, we must have a international consensus on these bombs.
That's the other thing too.
We have to do this. And the only way to do this, we already made a mistake because he wanted to share with the Russians the information. And the Americans said, we're not going to share with the Russians. We're not going to tell them what we have. And then when Truman at Potsdam, right, when they met, he didn't exactly tell them what it was.
Right.
And so Stalin didn't believe Truman.
No.
He did not believe that we had this bomb until it actually happened. But then he was pissed. I mean, the Russians had lost 20 million soldiers and civilians in the war.
The most.
The most. They helped us defeat the Germans. Actually, it was because of them we defeated the Germans. And earlier, he had made a deal with Roosevelt and Churchill reluctantly agreed, but it was only fair. We're going to split up Germany, split up Eastern Europe. That's just the way it's going to work.
Yep.
And Truman comes in. He's being advised by Stimson, Secretary of War, mostly by Burns. And he's not as keen as Roosevelt. And so he really falls into this idea of the Russians and the communism and all these things. And he's very susceptible to that. But certainly the idea of Oppenheimer, which I like in the film, is that he is aware that now we do have, he's aware of what he's doing, that it has to be done, and how it has to be done. And then afterwards, what do you do? Basically to save the world.
Yeah.
From how to save civilization. I mean, there's an atomic warfare. Humanity over the time will not go on. Some life will exist.
Yeah.
But not humanity.
So then historically, can we chart back to if we want to find the genesis of this and have I don't want to play a blame game, but have an individual, because it feels like it goes back to Einstein, right? Because
it does. It goes like there's actually
opened the floodgates to this thing. It was inevitable.
It was 40 years, 40 years.
Humanity was inevitably going to end here.
But will it? Because that you can't say that. This is a stepping point, and like one would hope, as we learn more and more. So it's that other thing. You can do applied science, but when you do that basic research, you make your universe a little bit bigger. And you access a little bit more information, and it doesn't. Do we have the capacity to destroy ourselves with the atomic bombs? Yes. Can we? Yes. Have we almost? Yes. Have we done it yet? No. So you got to have enough faith in humans that if we're capable of creating something so sophisticated, why can we not exhibit behaviors in terms of moral levels of sophistication? Why are we not as morally sophisticated? Why does technology always go faster than our moral compass? Why is that?
That's a great
wasn't
question.
a man who coined nuclear weapons. It was H.G. Wells. I mean, H.G. Wells early on in some of his early novels. And I think Wells, to mind, Carol, you said basically H.G. Wells was good friends with Joseph, not good friends. He was friends with Joseph Conrad. And we put it in context historically. Conrad's Heart of Darkness came out, I want to say, either between 1899 and 1902. Somewhere around that time. Wells had already written The Island of Dr. Moreau, The Time Machine, and War of the End of the World. I mean, The War of the Worlds.
War of the Worlds, yep.
And there's a quote from Conrad in a conversation with Wells says, the fundamental difference between us, Wells, is that you hate humanity, but think they can be improved. I love humanity and know that it can't. And and this was early, and like we talked about the atom, right? I mean, by the late 1900s, I mean, all these things, ever since Darwin, the mid 1850s, published The Origin of Species, and suddenly turned the world upside down, was he was suggesting of the evolution of humanity, right? And then we won't get into so much into how his words were later on. Survival of the fittest, something he never said, but that's the way it was applied later on by eugenics and people who used it. But that already began to change things. So this is like the 1850s. And then by the 1900s, something else interesting happened. Friedrich Nietzsche died. We all know Nietzsche, right? The Superman, the will to power, right?
Übermensch.
Right. So that's right. And so, but already his ideas had already there. And his ideas fundamentally about the will to power was there's two types of humanity. The ones who are going to impose their will on others, and those that are going to be subjected to that will. But those that impose their will on others will dictate what morality is, will dictate ethics, will dictate art. So it was already there. This was fundamentally questioning all these things. And then you had people then you had psychoanalysis already arrives.
Freud.
So suddenly what was the idea of soul and the unconscious is now being into, wait a minute, so dreams and the unconscious, the irrational, suddenly the atom by the scientists is not something stable.
Right.
There's something unstable here. You have around the same era a young man named Picasso, because some of his paintings appear in the film. Cubism, the way you portray reality. So by the early 20th century, all those things which had been for centuries, stable, begin to collapse.
Right.
And begin to question all these things.
Yep.
And science is on the march in a huge way. But it's science in a scientific way, but also in a spiritual way.
Right. Because simply the act of observations changes the outcome in quantum mechanics. And
in most things, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And the whole thing of Schrodinger's box and things like this. These are uncertainty principles. The idea of the electron and orbital occupation. And, when you see the slits in that movie where it goes and then shows like the electron rings around the nucleus, it's like those, but those slits, it has to do with a light experiment, shooting a beam of photons down like a
tube. I know what you're talking about.
Down a tube, but it has certain amount of splits. But basically, it shows that like an electron can be two places at once.
Yeah.
I mean, so It was just really like how it can occupy space. I don't know. But yeah, the quantum world is different than, it's not Newtonian. It doesn't behave by Newtonian principles, and everybody freaked out. They thought like it was bullshit, right? Because how do you get to the quantum level, and how do you prove these things other by these, But they started to do it, and the math made sense. I don't know, man.
Including Einstein. Einstein never accepted this.
Yeah,
He
he
wanted
didn't.
classical physics. He did not like, what Bohr and the others were suggesting with this. And I think even to the end, he never really believed in it. But he did believe in ethics, though. He did believe something had to be done. And this reminds me, well, I guess to point to something, what is Nolan doing with this film? Remember that movie that came out several years ago about Alan Turing?
Imitation Game.
Right.
Game. Sorry, Game.
Yeah, right. And here Alan Turing, who helped basically end the war himself and his team, right, by breaking the German code. And himself rather an eccentric guy. And basically he's a war hero. Right? He's a war hero. Now, much of what they're doing is in secret, but the top people in government know what they did, what he did, and they're indebted to him to help defeat the Germans. But what happens to him?
He gets crucified.
He gets arrested, right? He gets arrested for, I think, gross indecency. He's a gay man. And he does an act, it's against the law. In order for him not to go to prison, they force him to take this treatment, which basically, makes him impotent.
Chemical castration.
Makes him grow breasts, affects his mind, and at the end, eats an apple with cyanide. And basically, here's a man who should be a hero, but these issues, these prejudices of the time, Oppenheimer, the issue with the obsession with communism, and also personal vindictiveness from some people, right? Destroyed the man spiritually. Now, Oppenheimer didn't commit suicide.
Yeah.
But many people that knew him said he was never the same after his security clearance was revoked.
Yeah.
He was not, and he died young. He was like 62.
Yeah.
And you see those pictures of him when LBJ is
like
he looks much older.
He was emaciated.
Yeah.
Do you feel like this is where that difficult balance between religion and science comes into play? I think I'm hearing words like hope and faith and balancing these weighty concepts of how do we create a morality or an ethics.
Well, I don't think it has anything to do with God. I think it has everything to do with humanity and hope and faith in humanity, because there's not going to be any sky daddy that's going to be like intervening when there's a nuclear button.
It's done.
Like we have to have faith that we can rely upon our better angels and our better selves within to not do this shit so we've got, if we're evolving constantly, then that means that we have to continue to evolve, and that means recognizing that we have the capability of doing pro-social things. We have to be better.
And the thing that's interesting about this movie too, though, is look at what happened during a time in the 50s. All these people, all these scientists, what was impressive is all these scientists come together to do one thing. Think if we could actually put that knowledge and do that now with almost the whole world, what kind of good changes we could make.
Well, I just like to say, think about like COVID and how quickly we got vaccines and
or the getting to the moon.
Right.
Yeah.
when you put all those brains together with a common goal.
Yeah. You can make things happen. It just sucks that it has to be a crisis to cause these things to happen.
It almost happens every time it's a crisis.
September 11th.
No, it was fascinating. That's right. How all these scientists and all these people came together. They were brought in from all over the country. Many of them were immigrants, and within just a short period of time, I think 42, 43 to 45, some in Chicago, some in Tennessee, some in Los Alamos, they put together this this little thing. I don't know how big this is. This little bomb, right? That can basically do incredible amount of damage.
Yeah.
And it changed fundamentally. And it came at a time. Because the question is, would this have been invented without the war? But I think, and the thing is, but the science was already there. I mean, maybe it was Einstein, maybe whoever basically began to question the centrality of the atom, which wasn't Einstein, it was somebody earlier, but Einstein really cut it down.
Yeah.
The atom.
No, think
So-
about like a crime. Motive means an opportunity. Like, I just think that World War II caused such an escalation that it forced this hand. I'm not sure if this would have been technically executed if World War II had not happened. But then it's like a world war is inevitable based on our behavior. So is it, like you said, was it bound to happen? Was this gross application of powerful science like bound to be thrown into a war scene? Like,
I think again, the creation of the bomb, I think, would have happened. Maybe not then, but I think eventually it was
Eventually will.
inevitable.
Definitely.
It was inevitable because remember, initially it was just look at all this incredible energy.
Yeah.
Now you can say we can use this energy for good.
Yeah.
But one of the first things that came up in Oppenheimer and Bohr and the others, thinking of human nature, a bomb.
Yep.
Because this thing came up, the idea months before the Germans invaded Poland. But already people knew that Germany was on the war march. So they knew
Right.
some war was going to take place on the continent of Europe. And so people already knew that. So it was a big surprise. But maybe the magnitude of it maybe surprised people. And but certainly the bomb was already, it was something that first thing, because human nature comes in, how it could be used. It's with it. Let's go back to Bohr. He had this idea when it comes to quantum mechanics is you have this. There's a complement to everything.
Right.
You do an act, it could be for a good reason, but the complement is something negative. You do something negative, you do something here for good. That's why he saw the atom bomb was something maybe good, the end to all war.
Right.
Right? He said, we can do something here, the end, at least to all major wars. And in a way, he may be right, because since the end of World War II, there have been wars. But there have not been world wars as there have been for thousands of years. And many people suggest it's because X amount of countries own nuclear weapons. India, Pakistan, the US, China, France, Israel, and I forget the others.
Look how many times they've been over the years. Look how many times they've stopped, as example, Israel from launching nuclear weapons multiple times. They've wanted to do it for a long time. It's like, yeah, deterrent, every time a deterrent.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's why Oppenheimer was so motivated towards
The Security Council
stopping proliferation at the end of his career.
But then if you look on the other, if the flip side that I would say that I'd argue that for the time being, nuclear energy is probably one of the cleaner energies that you've got right now.
Yeah.
And so, and honestly, so I've heard this, and now look, yeah, sure, of course, yeah, about in terms of probability, there are other planets out there that have life. Okay, now we've also got the, I think, unidentified objects, right, flying out, whatever. Usually, so there's been like, it's been said that with a very high frequency, nuclear power plants have a lot of these UFO. There's a lot of UFO sightings. Now, that can be one of two things. One, it's just because like other nations and militaries have drones that are looking and trying to do their own co-op because, having these power plants are a big deal. Or it could be because, let's think about it. What is nuclear power? It's a quantum spark. Okay. And if there are I don't know what John's doing. I don't know if there are
I'm trying to figure out what's going on with my internet.
Yeah, you had a smile for a long time. If there are capabilities that we have for like creating machines big enough to propel or powerful enough to propel ourselves through the galaxy is going to be quantum in nature. And so it's like, would intelligent beings be like, oh shit, they just did a spark. It's like doing two spark, like cavemen. Is that what this is on a quantum level to maybe more superior? Like, but this is just big time. What if? This is me playing what if.
Well, it just reminds me of, what was it, Star Trek First Contact, and that first signature, is that the thing that draws attention, that first step in a new direction, right?
Atomics.
Bueller and Damien stopping in the chat. Thank you for coming by. Much appreciated, gang. So I guess for me, like, the concern is, like, it feels like the consciousness and the morality comes after. And there were definitely some of those quotes that I sent you guys where it's, I think it was Charlie Chaplin said, "Man is an animal with primary instincts of survival. Consequently, his ingenuity has developed first and his soul afterwards. The progress of science is far ahead of man's ethical behavior." And it feels like that, like the consequences coming after.
Yeah. The drive to survive, the drive to dominate, but the drive to pass on your DNA is going to be stronger than any secondary ethical concepts, because it's that's a tertiary function, right?
Yeah.
Like primary functions like reptilian, right? Secondary functions like mammalian, primate. Tertiary is where, all right, well, now we've got these prefrontal cortexes where we've got very sophisticated sets of emotions that we can barely regulate. But like, we can do all kinds of amazing things. It's just, we're monkeys. We're violent. Primates are the most violent mammal, period. And if not, in my opinion, animal, because we created the bomb.
Goes back to Conrad and Wells, right?
Yeah.
So what
for me, or the psychology side, the like lizard brain versus the greater thinking brain, right? The ability to get past that survival instinct to a place of
spread my seeds versus collective good. Like, it's a individual versus the collective. I don't know, man.
Well, and as a teacher, I always see like how easy destruction is when in the learning process. It's so easy when kids are learning something new to destroy it than it is to actually create it. The creation is so much more complicated, and so that place that for me is the higher level of thinking, is that ability to not just do something, the whim of destruction, but actually like to create something that is to the betterment of your fellow man.
Yeah, like art or music or things like literature. We have the capability of doing these things. We also have the capability of defining the natural world around us. But then it's like we can destroy each other too. It's like, how do you convince society as a whole, because we act so much shittier in groups and tribes, and I don't know.
So is this where Alan Moore's Watchmen comes in? Do we need a giant squid?
Yeah. Well, her point is,
because this is G-Man's here. We could talk tentacles now. Yeah. Do we need a squid, Robert?
No, because what her point is, and I think, is nationalism. And I think what the bomb did, the fact that the bomb exists is in a way, you have now all these countries, all these nationalities, but really is the bomb. The bomb is the one that could erase them all, but in the process erase all of us. And then if you have a country who defines us and them, as we have, historically. And now you have this instrument that could destroy them wherever they are, but they're not us. And it can be done. And it's one of these things of unintended consequences. That's why I like the ripples in the film.
Right.
The ripples, right? And
but that's actually from an experiment, an electron experiment.
Yep.
So that's why that's why I was trying to say, those, but anyways.
I knew what you were
But
talking about.
that it's almost like a metaphor, really, for much of it. What's happening here is things
So
that happen.
yeah.
I mean, Einstein, a very ethical man. I mean, I'm sure he lived, because of this. You got the bomb.
And yet he had mistresses, he had a different life. So
Sure, on a personal, yeah,
it's 'cause yeah.
that I understand. Yeah, but one final thing regarding what happened to these people. What happened to Alan Turing, what happened to Oppenheimer. There's an interesting case of that man named Fritz Haber. He was that German
Right.
who he's the one that basically took nitrate, right, and from the air basically, and basically created, but basically it's an artificial fertilizer.
Mhm.
And because of him, billions of people in the 20th century are here.
Yeah.
Because by the late 1800s, the issue was going to be growing population, guano and other fertilizers that people were searching around. There's only a certain amount,
Right.
and it's going to be massive starvation. But this man's interesting because, again, he was a German, but he's also Jewish. And so he does this, which saves, down the road to this day, we have a population of 7 billion now?
Yeah.
In part it's because of him. But this man also, he was the one who helped create the poison gas for the Germans because it was supposed to be the weapon to end the war, just like the bomb was.
Right.
And it was first used on the French in the Battle of Ypres, I think in 1940.
Cyclone B?
Right. Bingo. Same guy. He creates that after he has done, benefit for man, now destroying. Right? Zyklon B. And so his wife, thing is, he had experimented on this with some young scientists. And at one point, they did an experiment out in the open, and the wind blew back. Oof. And it killed one of the young men.
Oof.
His wife saw him there as he began trembling like an animal. When he perfected it, and he came back, and it was very effective on the French. He killed a ton of them within minutes. When he told his wife what he had done, she was infuriated with him. His wife was also a scientist. She was infuriated with him. He dismissed it. He had a party for 2 days. His wife takes his service revolver, goes out by a river, shoots herself in the chest, but is still alive long enough for their 13-year-old son to find her.
Yeah,
But that's not where his story ends. He continues to develop science, again, for Germany.
Right.
Because he's a proud German. That's why he developed this, to win the war. He developed a pesticide, a very effective pesticide. By the time he died in 1934, anti-Semitism was rampant. He had been a good German, very loyal to his country, but now, he's a Jew. So he has to flee, not knowing that pesticide he helped create, a form of cyanide, was going to be used in concentration camps to kill his nephews,
wow,
and other family members down the road.
So again, back to unintended consequences,
right? But there's a man who created something great for humanity, but something, but then it's how it's going to be used.
Yeah, but then you said Faber, created the nitrogen, that same fertilizer later by the Oklahoma City bombing, guy was used to blow up a building, McVeigh.
Yeah.
So, this is life-giving, but it's got a lot of power, doesn't it? It also has the power to destroy. Same compounds, right? Just slightly different arrangements.
But unlike Oppenheimer, he had never had any bouts of conscience. He felt what he was doing was right for his country.
That's what nationalism will do, and that's the problem.
That's the problem. But it ate its own because he was a German, but he was Jewish.
Because technology
he didn't really consider himself to be either or, though.
Right. He was more like many of them, like Oppenheimer,
Oppenheimer had a hard time accepting to being a Jewish, his nationality at all. Didn't like to be classified.
Yeah.
Caroline, it sounded like you were going to say something about technology. I was going to read another quote, and I think it might connect to what you were going to say. It says, this is from Louis Wolpert, a developmental biologist. He said, I would teach the world that science is the best way to understand the world, and that any set of observations, there's only one correct explanation. Also, science is value-free as it explains the world as it is. Ethical issues arise only when science is applied to technology, from medicine or industry. Is that something that resonates with you?
Yeah, it's always the application, because in theory, anything, it's harmless, right? But once you start making, applying that science and making tangible things and tools, or like aids, they can be used for harm or for good, like
Right.
anything. And because we have that reptile brain, we seem to do more harm a lot of times. Like, we're supposed to be stewards of the earth, right? We got all this climate change and there's nukes and stuff. It's just like,
It's funny because you mentioned earlier, I think there's this struggle between individuality and community that's at the core of some of this for me. Yeah. That's like, I know that G-Man, we've talked a few times about the value of community, right? The value of a community that's of a similar mindset and a similar goal versus an individual who's out for their money, their power, their wealth. How do you feel like? For me, the challenge is in this day and age where we're so widespread, there's so many of us. How do you create a community again, right? How do you get to that place again?
It's so fractured right now too.
Right.
In our society, we've really gotten to worship the individual. It's gotten more about that. And even to the point to where the internet that was supposed to connect us all is really more isolating.
Right. Let's just look at cat memes.
I mean, look, there's a science. Like, being with other humans, you have to, because there are pheromones that we emit that are pro-social pheromones. If you don't get it, you'll be fucking depressed. We're monkeys, bro. We're meant to be in like little groups. We're hairless monkeys, and we need to preen each other, and we need to, be close and show love and have systems of, social ranking. It's just the way we are. But we also have to be able to recognize that altruistic behavior, we have to do this. It's just we have to be accountable and be our best. How do you progress? Well, what do you do if you don't progress?
I noticed something the other one of the years when I was teaching with my third graders, because there was this moment that happens between kindergarten and first grade where students stop seeing themselves as the center of the world and start seeing how other people see them. And the balance between wanting to be an individual and wanting to be part of the crowd becomes very tenuous. And this goes on forever. And my teenagers are right in it, where they don't want to be seen as different or stand out or individuals, but they also want to be unique and be looked at as special and be looked at as, different or what have you. So balancing, like, what is the line from Wedding Crashers? Like, stand out, but do it on your own terms, right? Like how do you create a place to be an individual within a community that wants uniformity, right?
It's a delicate balance. We're so contradictory, and like I said, when we start to understand quantum forces that weave together our very pieces, like, because we have very basic, simple emotions, we can't handle that responsibly. How could we even be expected to handle that responsibly? We create things that we are not
and then you have all that power.
We can't, and it's like, but it's that thing where we want to see go boom, and we don't think about the consequences until after the fact, right?
Robert, you mentioned to me the real fear of the Red Scare, right? That time in history.
Yeah, it was called McCarthyism.
Yeah,
and it's like you're starting to see this whole reset. Now we're repeating history again all the craziness,
all the lizard brain stuff. Of
yeah,
like fear your neighbor.
Right back, and I'm seeing it again. And back then, that's what was happening. And they used him as a guinea pig, and I feel bad for him at the same time. And the interesting thing about the movie that I found interesting was he was trying to find that moral ground. He was. I mean, and even in like documentaries about him, he even tried to do the same thing. He knew there was a moral ground and
He was haunted by it.
Like, try to make the nuclear, what was it called? The nuclear, there was a council to control
the Atomic Energy Commission.
Yes, the commission. He helped put that together. Without him, it would have been total nuts right now. You know? But yeah, the during that time, the fascism, communism, and you even spoke up in. Here's the other thing: when we talk about our personal freedoms and we talk about our rights, that's how quickly they can be taken away. They did it back then; they can do it again.
I don't want to jump. I know I can see Gore like ready to. I
want
to let him get in here, but I wanted to mention.
My chair's rather uncomfortable. I don't know what.
Yeah, I know. I'm the same way. I keep moving.
It's not your moral compass tilting.
Yeah, I'm good.
No, I always, when it comes to the Red Scare, one of my favorite films about it is Good Night and Good Luck by George Clooney. Edgar R. Murrow and him versus McCarthy in the media, because and another Downey Jr. movie where he's really just caught. You see what it's like in the workplace to be in that space where your belief systems could threaten, your existence ultimately. Yeah. Very scary.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, look, things like that, your belief systems could threaten your existence.
Wait a second. Is it Lady Fantastic's birthday today?
I was going to say.
No, it's not. It's not.
Is somebody making a joke? Oh, it's Cat. Wait, never mind. It's Steve. It's Steve. Never mind. It's Steve.
Okay.
Happy
birthday,
I'm watching you, Steve. I'm watching you, Steve. And hey, Cliff. And hey, Toby. Good to see you. I didn't say hi to Rad. What's up, Rad?
Look, back if you weren't a Catholic, or if you were, if you were a Catholic, say in England or whatever, yes, your beliefs threatened your very existence.
Right.
So it's not a new concept that we will burn a person that doesn't believe in the same invisible creatures that we do.
Yeah. Oh, totally. That's that ostracizing thing that, at what point do you draw the line in a community where this person now needs to be ostracized? It's the original cancel culture concept, right?
That's the other
it's not a new thing. It's a humanity thing that's very scary that we've always had this need there are definitely people. I mean, obviously I'm pretty happy that Bill Cosby's not doing comedy anymore, but there are necessities for these things.
Yep.
But at what point are we doing it unnecessarily? And then are we damaging our community, right? That power comes into play that Lady F keeps bringing up, right?
Yep.
I think we've done
and it's also about money. Everything.
I mean, usually.
Everything's running on this. Always.
I was reading that the wealth inequality that we have in America now is greater than that of French Revolution in 1789.
Scary. Yeah, absolutely scary.
Think about the Red Scare. It's something very effective, It's like a domino. I think I discussed this before. And World War I gave us the Russian Revolution.
Yep.
That was the final straw for the people in Russia and the czars, which had ruled them for hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm.
Happened at a time when the ideas of communism began to be manifested among some of the middle class and the upper class. So we get basically a revolution and now communism. Meanwhile, the US, a relatively new country, is coming into its own. But we're a capitalist country, as we define it to be, where people, mostly immigrants, are coming here from European countries for the most part, where they could do things they couldn't do back home because of their class or their ethnicity, nationality, right? So what happened here was, in order to convince the Americans to get into this war, because most Americans were opposed to entering the First World War.
We were isolationists.
That's right. But it wasn't our war. The Lusitania had gotten sunk, but they had been warned. Americans, if you're on these ships, there's a war going on. But Wilson had this, an alliance, but had this connection to England. He wanted us in the war. So we get into the war. So we have to demonize people. Of course, we demonize the Germans. But then the communism thing comes in.
Hmm.
And if communism is we're going to take away your property, we're going to nationalize industry.
Yeah, everybody's equal.
America, because the Gilded Age has just ended. But this is what gave rise to, the magnets and such. So it's a threat. So how do you do this? You scare the hell out of the Americans.
Yeah.
And so this works quite effectively, but not so much. Because the 1920s are going fine. But then the crash comes in 29.
Yeah.
And so already communism, though, is beginning to spread because the ideas of it. And it's not anything really nefarious. At the time, it was just bettering people for the most part, particularly in Europe, right? But you have these issues just, festering. And by 29, it's it's an international economic crash. Germany, which for like 10 years or so, has been doing these repayments because of the war. And Germany's blamed for starting the war. They didn't start the war. A lot of deep resentment is there, especially among the veterans. One of those veterans is Hitler, who had been a war hero in the war. And so when the Depression happens, communism and fascism really take off. And in the U.S., it becomes a serious threat. So in 33, we have an election. Because Hoover is not doing, I guess, enough for the people. And the people elect not a common man, but a patrician man, New York Governor Roosevelt. And he has something in mind to basically create federal programs to better people. Now, in the past, when our government tried to do that a century before, well, a little bit more than a century before, it was called improvements. That's where the Whigs came in, Lincoln, Clay, all the others. Basically, the Federalist Party broke up and it had the Whigs. Eventually, the Whigs became the Republicans. And so it's called internal improvements. Those opposed to that saying it's federal encroachment, it's aristocracy. It only went so far in being effective. But now we have something you could throw at it. It's communism. All these labor laws, all these federal programs, it's communist. And that already had sunk into the public.
It's a buzzword.
It worked because it was already filtering in.
It's a boogeyman.
Bingo. Right. And then you throw in the fact that it's anti-Christian. Right? It works. So then the war, and then by the end of 45, and I'm going on, but I'm in 45, the Soviets are allied, no longer an ally. The war is over. Truman now has a problem. Europe has to be rebuilt. We do it, or the Russians do it. So his chief of staff, Marshall, sets the plan, the Marshall Plan, right, to rebuild Europe.
Right.
Basically, we're going to rebuild them, give them a ton of money. They're going to buy our stuff. But how do you convince the public to do this? The American public to do this?
Got to demonize.
Scare the hell out of them again. If we don't do this, the Russians are going to do it.
Yeah.
The communists are going to do it. So what he did between 45 and 47 is he scared the hell out of Americans. They were already anti-communist. They became even worse by then.
Yeah.
And by 47, when he had the loyalty oaths, he set up the National Security Council and the idea of deterrence, that the U.S. is now going to interfere in any country that may be threatened with communism. Call it containment. This was fundamentally due. So how do you convince the public to do this? You do this. So by the time before Oppenheimer, by this point, would have been a war hero. Now by this point, he begins to say, we don't need the hydrogen bomb. And all his friends, we all knew had communist friends, but now this begins really to be effective against him.
Right.
And then in 1949, all these things work against him. NATO set up. because the idea you need NATO. China goes communist. And the Russians have the bomb.
Yep.
So the idea was McCarthy was, this is before McCarthy. So all this gave birth to McCarthy. Because
McCarthy was just like the anti-intellectual wave of this strong anti-communism push.
Yeah, he wasn't factual though. That's the thing.
Yeah.
He was dumb.
He was a whack.
Anti-intellectuals.
But doesn't Oppenheimer then, as a result, represent all the things that he wants to throw rocks at? You've got science, you've got a morality with his affairs. You've got his communist leanings. He tends to be
things they don't understand.
He's the target for all of these things.
And I think a lot of these scientists were at odds with these politicians because they didn't even understand each other.
Yeah,
they were two different realms. One realm wanted to understand like the basic underpinnings of the natural world. The other realm wanted world domination. It was
wanted to make money and profit off of it.
That's exactly what it was. Yep.
But what also did him in was, again, something Truman didn't understand when he says we're going to keep this secret.
Yeah.
Is the only reasons the Russians got this information, got the bomb. One, there were spies at Los Alamos. Your friendships, Mr. Oppenheimer. And so maybe your opposition to the hydrogen bomb, which we don't think is for patriotic reasons. I mean, you developed one way to kill people, but you're opposed to this one. So maybe you are an agent of the Soviets, Mr. Oppenheimer. and communism is on the march.
Yeah.
North Korea, South Korea, that war begins. So the idea was always not a threat from the outside, but a threat from the inside.
Right.
Now we call it.
Well, that's the fear your neighbor mentality.
Yeah,
right?
Now we call it the deep state. Then it was
paranoia.
Called, and McCarthy called it. He called it the fifth column.
Yeah.
It was Americans who were being unpatriotic, and it was by who you were affiliated with. And Truman, at this point, he knew had gone too far. He tried to put a stop to it, but he couldn't. He had already convinced the people to support the Marshall Plan, support all this money for nuclear weapons.
And who came up?
And keep the military establishment. Normally, after a war, you cut back on the military budget.
Right.
How do you convince people and raise their taxes?
Yeah.
Well, and also,
but it wasn't just Truman; it was just the sentiment of the establishment at the time.
Who came also look who came up under McCarthy? Is that Roy Cohn, the biggest piece of shit ever, linked to Trump?
Right.
Talk about another nuclear bomb. Nah, anyways.
Even Kennedy was a little bit of a McCarthy when he was starting out early on in the Senate, John F. Kennedy.
I could go off on Roy Cohn, but let's say hello to Ryan in the chat. What's up, right?
Buddy.
Say JP is in the chat. He says, "I stole your time slot. Give me a break." I'm doing something a little more valuable than the whatever report, JP. I'll catch the replay of that.
Hey, JP.
I guess there's the balance of like, what is the function of invention? I feel like there's always
we're going through a new age right now.
Yeah.
We're definitely going through a new age.
What's
Look at our
invention. Convenience.
Yeah, that's one thing.
AI.
Is there a purpose? Does there need to be a purpose? Right? Can exploration and curiosity be the purpose?
Yes, that's what a basic science is.
Right?
Is just to know for knowledge's sake. Then applied science is, oh my God, I
need to make this easier.
Now we're doing quantum computers. Now we're working on quantum computers. Look at that technology right there. That's unreal.
And guess what? Most of our microchips, like now most of the most advanced like weaponry now all rely on microchips, which are made in just a couple of places. And we all know how that's going to be a conflict. So
Absolutely.
just like technology and power go hand in hand. We're too primitive to handle the technology. And it will always be the case. And that's why you see us being so self-destructive.
When you look at what Nolan is trying to say, with obviously the last few moments of the film, he's got a visual that he's trying to
Right.
a doomsday almost scenario he's trying to present. Do you feel like he made this film, and I guess this is for everybody, but I'll throw it to Gore first. Do you feel like this was like was he making this film as a warning? Do you feel like in some way, but beyond being a historical, biography sort of piece, do you feel like he had warnings that he was trying to pass along?
I think there are warnings there, and that final image that you alluded to at the end, when I saw that, I knew that Oppenheimer in 1951 had been privy to the Air Force's plan. If the Soviets and the U.S. ever went to war, the Air Force plan was to use the B-29s.
Yep.
And the way it was going to be used was...
Is this the Dr. Strangelove?
This is it. This is it. It really was. And, that's why I think this is why he was just adamant about the hydrogen bomb. And and also what he had done is, the strategy was, first, you bomb the satellite countries of Soviet Union. That's all Eastern Europe. You bomb them. Then you obliterate the Soviet Union. China is now communist 2 years. You obliterate China. So within a week's time, you kill about 250 million people. So, again, he had been given privy to this. This is before his national security clearance was revoked.
Right.
This was the Air Force's plan if the U.S. and the Soviets ever went to war. So those images that you see, it's also that, but it's also fail-safe,
Right.
But, a movie that I was thinking about.
I was going to say, I remember when I was in high school when George Clooney remade that, like live. He did a live remake of.
I've never seen the remake. I've just seen the original. I like it.
I was blown away, not because it was live television. Like mistakes happened, and they were recreating the story. Black and white. Like for each, they did it for East Coast and for West Coast.
And I don't know if he was privy. Don't think he was, because this information didn't come up about the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Sure.
Because what happened with in the movie Failsafe, which came out around the same time, I think, as the Cuban Missile Crisis, is you have the Walter Matthau character, who's like the future Henry Kissinger character.
Yeah.
And those of you not familiar with it, basically in Failsafe, you have some American planes, bombers, on the cusp of Africa and the Soviet Union. Something goes wrong, something malfunctions. And they're informed by their computers on their planes that we're at war. And the commanders are basically, the way it works is at this point, you don't talk to Washington, you just do your mission.
Just do your mission. Yep.
Your mission. And the Americans find out, and they contact the Soviets thinking, we don't know what's happening. They don't know what has happened at this point. And so they don't know why they're heading that way, but they have to be ready for it. Anyway, in the film, you have a character named Walter Matthau, who I think is national security advisor, and he's telling the president, played by Fonda, saying, "Okay, it's a mistake, but let's use this opportunity. Let's use this opportunity to bomb the Russians. It'd be a preemptive strike."
It felt like the dramatic version of Dr. Strangelove. Like Strangelove was the satire and Failsafe was the drama.
But this happened with the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right.
Because Kennedy was being told by some of his generals, let's use this as an opportunity to just go to war. But basically going to bomb those facilities in Cuba. But what they didn't know at the time, Robert McNamara found this out in the late 80s when he went to Cuba. And a Soviet general told him that they did have nuclear weapons in the submarines.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they were good. And so if they had gone to war, it would have been a nuclear war for sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And then you have that scenario about that Soviet submarine captain. No, there's one of the captains on a submarine ship. There's a blockade that the Americans have put around Cuba, and there's a Soviet submarine. And one of the American ships began to drop some depth charges, not that are harmful, but the Soviets don't know this. They think they're being attacked. But the way it worked is you have 3 people in command. All 3 have to approve the use of the nuclear. And one man dissents. One of those Russians dissented and said no. I mean, I don't know how many situations we've had that since the bomb to this day.
Yeah.
Right.
Of those few people who allow us to still be here.
Did you see the film? I had an uncle that was a cinephile, and we saw a lot of movies together before he passed. And 13 Days was one of the last ones we saw together. Kevin Costner film about Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it turns those 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis into one of the most gut-wrenching, palm sweating. It creates what people should have when reading and learning about that period in history in real time. Sorry, good. Hey, Comic Head 84 Kenny is in the chat. What's up, my man? And it's not really Caroline's birthday. You can go wish happy birthday to Captain Comics and Steve. Steve
Comics.
It's Captain Comics' birthday today is what we'll say instead. I wanted to give a little time for some last thoughts here, and Caroline sent an amazing video to finish us out with, and the video is linked in the chat too. So in the description, if people want to rewatch it or find it for themselves, I guess I don't know how to summarize a lot of this because there's some huge things here cinematically. There's some huge things here historically. There's some huge things here ethically. Yeah. Robert, did you have any last thoughts that things you wanted to say about humanity, about science, just in general to finish it out here?
No, I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. I have stuff written down here.
I was going to say, we've all got, we could do 10 of these and probably never end, right? Or Comic Head, Magneto, and he stopped the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? According to X-Men movies. Lady Fantastic, same with you. I'm sure you've got a lot that you'd love to say about this topic forever as well. I
just think that within all of us lies the capacity for good and for evil, and that we are responsible for trying to do the good. We have to try and fight our inner animal, because we're going to be the first to react that way. We are animals. Don't separate or forget that, okay? Because as animals we have certain requisites, right? But at the same time, we understand quantum mechanics. If we're capable of doing that, let's do some more. Let's do good with it. Not bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, you said that phrase "better angels," I think earlier, and it's definitely been resonating with me as we've been planning this show tonight.
Find that better self, because if you don't, we go to the power games. We become the Trumans and the Stalins and the whoever's, and ultimately, nobody really likes a politician.
Which I think is another takeaway I had from Oppenheimer.
Yep.
When you get to the end of Robert,
They're small people.
Yeah,
they're small people. The smallest people make the biggest decisions.
Yeah.
If you want to, let's put it that way.
Gore, you've raised concepts of psychology tonight, and Laszlo's hierarchy of needs, and where we fit in. Obviously, as a country, we're incredibly wealthy, and most of us are able to meet the most basic needs and reach a place of higher thinking. But we're also, as Lady F mentioned, a culture that's incredibly split for prosperity. And there's a lot of people that don't have that. So how do we summarize this in a way that feels like people can come together in some way, find some common ground, right?
We're all humans, and we all have the right to life, and not to be like that. But we have as long as we're walking on the earth, it's not our choice to decide who lives and who dies. And we've really got to be better and use different alternatives than violence. We've got to.
This scene in Oppenheimer when he stares out He's with his brother and Lawrence. They're in New Mexico, and they're looking at the stars.
Yep.
And he understands the stars better than most of us, right?
Right.
So he sees things that we don't see. And now when I see a star, I see things differently because of him and other scientists. And you guys remember the Hubble telescope when in the 90s, I think it was 90s or 2000s, when there was like a pinpoint,
Yep.
you know, like that pin, and you put it against the wall. The Hubble hovered onto one pinpoint in the universe. And what it saw wasn't stars, but galaxies.
Yeah.
At one pinpoint. Not 10 galaxies, not 1,000, but tens of thousands of them. In one little pinpoint or grain of sand. And that's all it showed.
Right.
And so suddenly we realized there are trillions of galaxies when you think about it in this universe. We're here. We're here in part because there was an asteroid that broke off from Jupiter's asteroid belt, crashed here, killed 70% of life, including the dinosaurs. And then over time, humanity emerged. And we are the third planet from the sun in our solar system, the only one that has life. We see how minuscule our galaxy is. There's nowhere else to go. There's nothing, and even if there is a place to go, getting humanity there,
Right.
It
takes forever.
It takes forever.
Mm-hmm.
This is our planet. So those final images of Oppenheimer, this is our home.
Yeah.
And it wasn't in the film, but Oppenheimer was very literary. And he was reading the French poet Baudelaire when the bomb was dropped. And I'm assuming it's from this is The Flowers of Evil by Charles Baudelaire, a great 19th century French poet. He was the one that made Edgar Allan Poe popular because he embraced him more than the Americans did. And one of the poems he supposedly was reading was, I'm going to read part of it, if you don't mind. It's rather short.
Oh, please, go ahead.
And it's called Twilight Evening. It says, it begins, twilight. It comes as an accomplice, stealthily, the lovely hour that is the criminal's friend. The sky, like curtains round the bed, draws close, and man prepares to become a beast of prey. This is the hour to compose yourself, my soul. Ignore the noise they make, avert your eyes. Now comes the time when invalids grow worse, and darkness takes them by the throat. They end their fate in the usual way, and all their sighs turn hospitals into a cave of the winds. More than one will not come back for broth, warmed at the fireside by devoted hands. Most of them, in fact, have never known a hearth to come to, and have never lived.
That's beautiful. Wow.
The beautiful poem by Baudelaire, but that's what I was reading when the bomb was about to be detonated.
Wow.
You know, and here we are. I mean, we are in Oppenheimer's world. Well, basically, we're in Einstein's world, the atom.
Yeah.
Whoever understood the atom got us here. Whoever the men and women who basically said that it's just not matter. It's not just this body. There's something underneath. Let's look what's there. Mary Shelley, to some degree, did it with Frankenstein, right? In her story. But like Caroline alluded to, we are God. We have this idea that we can do this. And I think what maybe we can do, but it really is to make our children understand what I just said about how important this planet is. How big the universe is. It's almost incomprehensible.
How
It
precious
really is.
life
It's
is.
almost, I lose my breath sometimes just thinking about it. The earth could disappear overnight. I mean, literally disappear. The universe goes on.
Yeah.
Right.
The universe is expanding at an exponential rate and will continue to.
And the idea that we can think and enjoy and love and live and be happy. And how we do this, still quite magical in some ways.
And that, but even knowing that we're so small and minuscule and things are really kind of meaningless, we continue to have hope and love and faith and joy.
So
it's resilience.
Well said.
I appreciate that. That's great. So I'm going to see if I can play this video and actually have the sound appear. I don't know. I haven't tried this before. So let me screen share this video that Caroline sent me. All right. Let's see if I can blow it up like that for everybody. Okay. And let me know. Hopefully you guys can hear it all right.
Richard Dawkins.
Nice.
Yeah.
And that makes us the lucky.
Can we hear it?
I can hear it.
Most
It
people
started to
never-
the very beginning.
never going to
Oh,
be
do I need to
born.
back it up?
Yeah.
Okay.
We are going to die, and that makes us the lucky ones. Most people are never going to die because they're never going to be born. The potential people who could have been here in my place, but who will in fact never see the light of day, outnumber the sand grains of Sahara. Certainly those unborn ghosts include greater poets than Keats, scientists greater than Newton. We know this because the set of possible people allowed by our DNA so massively outnumbers the set of actual people. In the teeth of these stupefying odds, it is you and I, in our ordinariness, that are here. We live on a planet that is all but perfect for our kind of life, not too warm and not too cold, basking in kindly sunshine, softly watered, a gently spinning green and gold harvest festival of a planet. Yes, and alas, there are deserts and slums, there is starvation and racking misery to be found. But take a look at the competition. Compared with most planets, this is paradise, and parts of Earth are still paradise by any standards. What are the odds that a planet picked at random will have these complacent properties? Even the most optimistic calculation will put it at less than 1 in a million. Imagine a spaceship full of sleeping explorers, deep frozen would-be colonists of some distant world. Perhaps the ship is on a forlorn mission to save the species before an unstoppable comet, like the one that killed the dinosaurs, hits the home planet. The voyagers go into the deep freeze, soberly reckoning the odds against their spaceships ever chancing upon a planet friendly to life. If 1 in a million planets is suitable at best, and it takes centuries to travel from each star to the next, the spaceship is pathetically unlikely to find a tolerable, let alone safe haven for its sleeping cargo. But imagine that the ship's robot pilot turns out to be unthinkably lucky. After millions of years, the ship does find a planet capable of sustaining life, a planet of equable temperature, bathed in warm starshine, refreshed by oxygen and water. The passengers, Rip Van Winkles, wake stumbling into the light. After 1 million years of sleep, here is a whole new fertile globe, a lush planet of warm pastures, sparkling streams and waterfalls, a world bountiful with creatures darting through alien green felicity. Our travelers walk entranced, stupefied, unable to believe their unaccustomed senses or their luck. The story asks for too much luck. It would never happen. And yet, isn't it what has happened to each one of us? We have woken after hundreds of millions of years of sleep, defying astronomical odds. Admittedly, we didn't arrive by spaceship, we arrived by being born. And we didn't burst conscious into the world, but accumulated awareness gradually through babyhood. The fact that we gradually apprehend our world rather than suddenly discovering it should not subtract from its wonder. It is no accident that our kind of life finds itself on a planet whose temperature, rainfall, and everything else are exactly right. If the planet was suitable for another kind of life, it is that other kind of life that would have evolved here. But we, as individuals, are still hugely blessed. privileged, and not just privileged to enjoy our planet. More, we are granted the opportunity to understand why our eyes are open and why they see what they do in the short time before they close forever.
It was wonderful, Caroline. Thank you.
Yeah,
That was
Caroline.
excellent.
She sent me that the other day, and I've watched it 4 times, I think, already.
Excellent.
It's just absolutely amazing.
It's very moving.
We won the lottery, guys. If you're self-aware, if you're sitting right here, if you're breathing, if you got a name, you won. We won.
So I want to thank all 3 of you, obviously, and anybody in the chat for taking the time to go on a existential discussion around the fate and function of humanity. And but like I mentioned, that video I just played is linked down below, along with all the YouTube channels for these amazing contributors here. It's really just something I love when a film becomes the launching pad for deeper thought. And
Yes.
and this was a great opportunity. I appreciate you all coming to join me for this.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
Absolutely.
My
And,
camera died.
oh, I'm sorry. You're deep in thought, but it
Yeah.
lasted to the very end.
That was excellent.
Yeah. So for anyone looking for more Oppenheimer discussion, I am having another discussion next Saturday around cinematically, like films that have parallels to Oppenheimer. So that'll be phase 2 of this.
Don't know if
And a bunch of them came up tonight, although I wouldn't probably repeat Wedding Crashers, but yeah, and a lot of other ones that we can discuss as well. So stay tuned to that as well. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Robert.
Thanks, Gore.
Thank you.
You man.